Hi, Graphic Design 1. So let's talk about cyanotypes. So this is going to be what you should be watching after you do the pear deck that I posted that's student paced. So this pear deck that says throwy cyanotype exercise, you're going to need to complete that first. And then we're going to talk about what is a cyanotype. So you're going to be designing your throwies or your throw ups. They can be whatever word you want them to be as long as it is school appropriate. And we're going to design them by first sketching them on paper and then scanning that paper and putting it into Illustrator. And then we get to make a cyanotype after that. So that brings us to the question, what the heck is a cyanotype? So if we move to the next slide here, this will kind of explain the process. Okay, so the way that this works is that I have some paper that I have pre-treated with a material that is UV sensitive. So it's like a part A, part B solution that when you mix them together and you paint them onto a object, it becomes UV sensitive. So this first image is that initial paper and what it looks like. So this picture up here that says number 1, the paper will initially be like kind of like a yellow tinge. So if the paper is like yellowy like this, that means that it has not been exposed to UV light yet. So what we are going to do is after we design our throwies in Illustrator, we're going to print them out on transparency paper, or we might like use Sharpie on transparency paper to block out the UV light. So this is really similar to using masking in Photoshop, because with a mask, you're adding that white square where you can cut holes or show through to what's going on underneath. And so this is kind of like a real life version of that. So here is the paper that's in that example. So we've got like our cyanotype, and then this is the transparency. So everywhere that is the color of the ink is going to be covered, and everywhere that's see-through will allow UV light to affect the image, right? To affect the paper. So you're going to attach your transparency to your paper in the workroom, and then we're going to take it outside and we're going to expose that image to the UV light from the sun. So this second image right here shows what that looks like. So you can see that the first one where we were working in the workroom is kind of like a yellowy tinge. And then this image, after it's been sitting outside in the sun for about 5 minutes, it looks kind of like silver, right? So this is means it's done, like when it turns that silver color. And then we're going to take it back into the workroom and we're going to remove that transparency, and then you'll see that the image, the spaces that were covered are still that yellowish tinge from before we started. So we're going to rinse out everything that was not exposed to UV light. And when we rinse everything out, that's how we're going to get something that looks like this, where everything that was covered turns the color of the paper, so it'll be white. And everything that was transparent or see-through turns cyan. So that's why this is called cyanotype, because when you make it, the material that we're using that's UV sensitive turns blue. It turns this cyan color. So again, this is kind of an example of that. So we've got our finished product here and the transparency that I used so that we could cover up the parts that we wanted to be white. So that's what you guys are going to be doing after we make the design. But just like our lapel pins, it's important to know the process before we start designing. So that way you know exactly what you should include in your throwing. So now that we know the process, when we make our throwing, when we sketch it on paper, we can sketch like just the lines, right? However, after we do that and we bring it into Illustrator, we're going to need to flip it or make a negative of it. So you can see on this example that I did the word honey. And so this is my original sketch. This is my drawing that I did with like marker on a piece of paper. And then I took this into Illustrator and made a negative of it. So I flipped everything. So everything that I wanted to be the color of the paper needs to be black in Illustrator. And everything that I want to be cyan needs to be white in Illustrator. So you can see here in my negative that I wanted the inside of my letters to be white, but I need to separate them. So there's this separation of this thick white line here to make it where you can still identify the individual letters, right? So these sections that are see-through here that are white end up being blue on the design. So you guys can see on my cyanotype here in these sections where it was white on the design, it is cyan or blue when it's finished. So keep that in mind while you're designing. You can also include lots of stylistic choices in your design. So for example, on my honey, the spaces that could be empty, I turned them into X's, right? So the inside of the O, the inside of the E, I made those little X's. The examples that I provided to you on the PEARDECK also include some extra embellishments. So for example, this one that says Aaliyah has like drippy sections. This one that says Halo has an extra outline around it. This one has like an arrow on the end. This one here has like these little like extra bits that give it some more character. So when you're designing your throwy, you can definitely add extra elements of symbols or outlines or drips or anything that you want to add that gives it a little bit more character. So just make sure that we're keeping in mind that in Illustrator, it needs to be the negative of what you want to actually happen. Okay. Again, to recap, you're going to sketch it on paper. After you sketch it on paper, you're going to make it in Illustrator. And in Illustrator, you have to make sure that you're creating a negative of what you want it to look like when you're done, so that it will come out something like this. All right, so hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, you guys can message me on Remind. Even though I'm at Roosevelt Rush, you guys can still access me that way. So good luck, get some work done. I believe in you.